I'm last, and I guess I'm the only person who's keeping you from eating dinner, so for those of you who are still here, thank you. For those of you who are still watching, why? No, sorry. Yeah, let me turn off some things now that I think about it, because I really don't want any... Okay, so you already got this frustration in development. So, yeah, next slide, there we go. So this presentation is rated M for Mountain West Recon. It also will be a little bit mature. No, it's not going to have sexual themes or intense violence. Well, okay, it might be yelling. No blood and gore. Strong language, I pretty much guarantee, though. And alcohol, if anyone wants to get me some whiskey, I'd appreciate it. But otherwise, no alcohol, sadly. Beg your pardon?
This isn't Ruby on Rails.
Oh, this is Ruby on Rails. I realize that. So, yeah, this is me, right? I'm a freelancer. Hire me. I don't break screens like Dave does. This is how I want to feel on a daily basis when I'm working. You know, for those of you who don't know, this is the Dalai Lama. Tends to be, you know, at least I tend to see him as one of the more peaceful and happy people in the world. Sadly, this is how I usually feel on a daily basis. Angry, bitter, frustrated with the world, with code, with clients, with everything. So, how'd I get here? Yeah, I'm not so sure either. So that's where I started this presentation in colloquial shut up, so just pretend it's not there. So 13 years of contracting with the federal government will probably drive anyone insane. The government's really good at disciplining your tax dollars and starting projects that don't finish. Most software projects are failures. Even more government software projects are failures. Then I bounced in and out of startup land. I've been through 2 bubbles. Yeah, that's where the gray hair came from, or at least some of it. And lately, well, I've been working for myself as a freelancer, so that's its own special kind of stress, paperwork, taxes, all that good stuff. And so I've been doing this for a while, been about 16 years, and I've seen a lot of crap in my job. I've seen a lot of projects do bad things. These days I tend to get a lot of rescue projects. I see a lot of things that people have done wrong, and I do some things wrong myself occasionally, of course. But it pisses me off. And yes, that's Anakin Skywalker, sorry. And so if you might remember in that movie, one of those movies I like to pretend never happened, there's this little green guy who said fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. Well, let's talk about hate. Yeah, where I found this image, I fell in love with it instantly, but the comments, most of the comments hit him harder. Yeah, that's what I felt too. So I really hate writing presentations. I like giving them, but I really don't like writing them because I start off with this. What the hell do I do with this? So what I did this time was I started mind mapping. I whipped out my mind map app on my iPad and started jotting down everything that came to my mind that pissed me off about Star Wars. No. Actually, interesting segue there, but I'll get back to that later. But it pissed me off about software projects. And so I mentioned TDD up there because we have the same problem when we're writing software in a greenfield project or anytime you're starting a new class. Where do you begin? Well, sometimes I just don't know. Sometimes we go into a project, we think we know when we're going to build something, and then we start writing tests if we're good people, even then that's not TDD, because you should go into it not knowing what you're going to implement, darn it. But, so going in not knowing what you're going to do is great. Just start writing down what you have to do. We call those pending specs, that's a good thing. And then build from there. My mother-in-law really pisses me off. A whole lot. And actually, that's how she got in here. I was mind mapping one day, I was working on these slides, and my mother-in-law walks in and starts talking to my wife, and I thought, you know, I don't know what else to write down next to my mind map, so I wrote down my mother-in-law, and I started to feel better, and I realized, this presentation is going to be cathartic for me. Hopefully it'll at least be entertaining and informative to you. But my mother-in-law is really terrible at minding her own business. And, well, so I'm going to show some code that's kind of metaphorical, you know, that relates to my mother-in-law. So, the user class, your typical Rails app, it tries to get into everything. It tries to do everything, because after all, the user's the one pushing the buttons all the time, right? He's the one who does everything. So you include all these stupid behaviors and associations, rules, and whatnot. And then, so how is this different than having all the methods in the damn user class in the first place? It's not really. Mitch talked about this. If not just Mitch, then Mike talked about it too. You're just pushing code around. It doesn't make it any better. But one solution I was introduced to actually at the last RDD camp is something called DCI, which stands for Data Context Integration. So let me talk to this just a little bit. Here what I have is a little bit of code I yanked out of the Ruby Pair project that was kind of a playground for me for some new ideas. And what it's doing is it's receiving a response from GitHub when a user has authenticated and they want to create an account on Ruby Pair. So what it does is, obviously the session controller, we're calling a method, and then we get the user, but then we extend the user with this new user provisioner module. Well, what's that? It's basically a role. So it's the context, if you will, in this case. And that role comes with the provision with method, and we pass that the OAuth data. That does all the work. I didn't include that method here because it's really not that pretty, not that interesting to look at. It's basically, let's unpack a whole lot of data from nested hash table we get back from GitHub, dump it in the user class, and save it to the database. Point is, it's not in the user class. It's not mentioned in the user class. It's mixed in context in the controller. And so that means that our user class is not so messy. Our controller is nice and contextual. You can see that we're provisioning a new user because that's the name of the role. And then we have a method that might be a little bit repetitive in terms of names, so maybe that's a little bit of a downside of DCI. The only thing I'll mention here that I've heard a lot of, but I haven't really tried to benchmark, is that when we are extending an object at the runtime, we're blowing away the method cache, so we might lose a little bit of performance. By the way, the only other thing that makes this viable is that because Rails does not keep the objects around past the length of the request, it's safe to do this. If we actually had a data mapper with identity mapping and you're keeping the objects around between requests, this would be a problem potentially. Okay, so monkey patching. I had an image here that I took out that maybe was a little bit too much for some reason. I heard it Ruby on nails. So let's just leave it at that. If you're really curious, come see me afterward, I'll show you. So this was a personal source of pain for me. I mean, monkey patching has come up a few times lately here. But in this case, this is a gem that shall remain unnamed. I don't want to pick on the gem author, but it's a really good example of how not to do it. So he took rescue, and then if you read the comments, he took rescue and he wanted to add a behavior before this runhook method, which is kind of important for doing anything in rescue. And he monkey patched it. Well, we needed to actually set up something on rescue using this hook feature that they have that they expose via a break task. And it wouldn't run, it wouldn't run, it wouldn't run. For hours, I was trying to figure out what the hell am I doing wrong here. I was blaming me. And then somewhere along the way, I got the idea, let's fire up, there's Corey, try. And let's go look at where this method is defined. Well, look, it was defined in here and not in any of my code or in rescue or anywhere else. That was 4 hours of my life down the toilet. So don't monkey patch. This is totally an excuse. Don't monkey patch. The solution is instead dependency injection. I know it sounds like a big nasty Java word. Okay, Ryan has a big needle there to scare you. Don't be scared of it. The correct answer here would have been patch rescue, for God's sakes. I mean, if the gem doesn't have a feature that you need, add it. We have this great thing called GitHub that takes pull requests. Most of us have code on there. So it wouldn't have been too hard to just add a mechanism to the API for rescue, even just for this guy's own uses, potentially. And just, he could have depended on that, fine. It would have been a fork, but then he could put the PR in. And that would have let him add his hook to some list of hooks. And then he could have exposed it so other people like me could have added my hook to either go before or after. But instead, I lost 4 hours of my life to this. So dependency injection is not just for Java. It's not a big scary thing. We're just talking about putting like adder accessors on here that expose instance variables. That's all. So, law of the meter. How many of you here have heard of the law of the meter? About half, maybe. Okay, so here's the short version based on my experiences with C++. You can play with your friends. You can play with your privates. Don't play with your friends' privates. It's generally frowned upon unless they're really, really, really close friends. A special kind. That shouldn't offend anyone. That was gender neutral. Just. Thank you. I'll be here all evening. Style. There have been studies that show that horizontal code is really, really damn hard to read. Vertical code, meaning put some fucking carriage returns in there to date. Okay? It's not, it's okay, it's going to add more lines to your file. Big fucking deal. You'll read that. And so will you. I mean, I'm hoping you're reading that, because if you do this, I will find you and hurt you. So, my mother-in-law, back to her again. She's a little bit insensitive. She's a little bit insensitive to how other people feel. She just, says whatever's on her mind. Well, so's Corey and Brandon, as it were. I mentioned a little Star Trek quote, and here I get trolled. Thanks, guys. So, what I'm getting at here, though, and I think this was touched on a little bit earlier. Check your ego at the door. This isn't just, I'm not just talking behaviorally, though. In terms of writing your code, sometimes we all feel like we need to be a hero. We've got some really hard problem. We only can think of maybe a really hard way to solve it. If that's what you're going to do, you know you're going to write something messy. Please, be a hero in private. Do it in isolation. Go make some module or some other class, put all your evil in there, put a note comment on it so someone can find it in the great notes later, and make it not suck. Or at least you can ideally go back later and make it not suck. Don't put it right in the middle of some class where it's going to be a landmine, where I'm going to be reading through and I go, okay, what the fuck? Please, no, just put it somewhere else. That was talked about a little bit by actually Jack, as it happens. Moving right along. So, conventions. Yehuda gave a great talk on this at Ruby on the Nails, and so we have a lot of overlap in our talks. I think it's actually a good thing. We're reinforcing, I hope, some of these points. Constraints are good. That's why we like to use Rails. We have these conventions so we can pick someone else's code up, among other things, pick someone else's code up and have a half a chance of understanding what they're doing. If we didn't have Rails, and if we were back in Java hell like I was for 9 years, before structs, we didn't even have that. You'd be writing all this crap in JSPs, in beans, and everyone would have their own form of dispatching, their own form of routing, their own form of ORM, or using DAOs and whatnot. No, that sucks. So, Rails. I see this kind of shit way too often too. People just decide, well, fuck the whole rest of the thing. I'm just going to go make my own methods. And obviously I stripped out a whole lot there. Just the method names alone are bad enough, and then who knows what the behavior is going to be, because well, they're not following the RESTful convention, so who knows if they're going to be following any others. So, instead, make it boring. Boring is good.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, again, we have these conventions. Please, stick to them. They're there for a reason. They will make your life better if you have to come back to the code later, and they'll make it easier for some poor slob like me who has to come along later and play code janitor on it. So, vocabulary. Anyone who takes a class that associates two things and just takes the two class names and mashes them together needs to get a fucking thesaurus. Really, okay? If you have a user, a team, and a user belongs to a team, you don't call it user team, you call it something like team membership. If you are someone, if you have a user who's subscribing to, say, a magazine or something, you might want to create an association instead of user magazine. You might call it subscription. Just don't do this. So, thanks, Jack. This goes back, this has been said enough times. Yes, names are really hard, but and at least what I tend to do is I'll come up with, when I'm not pairing, which is a lot of the time actually, I'll just come up with the best name that I can. But if I can't come up with a good short name, I'll just write a damn long name that's at least descriptive. And if it sucks, I'll come back to, because it's long, that's a big bookmark for me, to come back to it later and rename it, but at least otherwise people will know what it is. Okay, so enough code. So let's talk about our lives a little bit. So at least coming out of college, getting into programming for me, or any of you guys who start programming, your life is probably like this: all lightsabers and blasters and adventure and cool shit. Yeah, right. And then you start to grow up a little bit, and you end up dealing with schedules and budgets and meetings and management, and then you end up being told about midichlorians and Yes, go, what the fuck? And then you end up with this. You end up with this travesty of a movie, or career as it was. But, and I'm going somewhere with this, obviously. Consider, you have to pause every now and then when you're suffering. When you're writing code, when you're just dealing with, work, well, hell, in life in general. When you hurt, it helps to pause and think about what's causing me this pain. Where's the dissonance? So, stretch out with your feelings, as I put up there. But think bigger, we all serve something. Chad Fowler's talked about this before too. We all serve something, whether it's an ideal, whether it's an organization, whether it's a family, whether it's a partner, or we all serve something. So what is that? And are you serving it correctly? So what I'm kind of getting at here is we all believe what we do. It's why we're here at this conference. We were passionate about what we do. It matters to us, to the extent that we will argue about whether patching Rails is a good thing or not, and that sort of thing. But maybe we should pause for a moment and try to think about some of the bigger things. This is actually, whether you believe it or not, this was me 8 years ago. A little bit less of this, a little bit less gray hair. Okay, a lot less gray hair. You can't really tell necessarily. And that's my wife over there. That was about 6 months after she got diagnosed with Huntington's disease, which is a systemic, progressive, genetically dominant disease that affects the brains. When I say systemic, it affects the brain systemically. Being genetically dominant, we wanted to have kids, but the odds of passing the disease down would have been 50-50. We could have spent a lot of money to ensure that we could have had kids and the kids would be safe. But then there was the question of, well, what kind of father would Evan be if Evan has to take care of his wife, who was essentially regressing to childhood, and take care of a child, and try to take care of himself, which probably he can't do very well sometimes. So, and it got worse than this. So, I'm up at this conference called Ruby Fringe. Maybe some of you were there. And while I'm at the conference, I find out that she might lose her medical insurance. And as you might imagine, with a disease like this, that would kind of be the end of life as we know it, as though we hadn't already experienced that once before. But also at this conference, there was this fellow named Damien Katz, who maybe some of you have heard of. Guy who wrote CouchDB. He had a kind of similar experience where he got laid off from his job and had to sell his house, sell his car. It was like the country song playing, well, forward, not back. Actually, they're playing the country song backwards, right? He had to basically give up everything. And then he just kept working on CouchDB, though. He didn't give up. And then along came IBM, and they scooped him up, and they gave him a job just building CouchDB. And now he has his own damn company working on CouchDB, and he's a big success. And I heard that talk and thought, well, shit, my life's about as low as you can go. Maybe it's time to do something different. I mean, what do I have to lose? My wife's about to lose her insurance. I was working for a startup, my second startup, I mentioned this, Two Bubbles, that I knew was about to lay me off because they were running out of money. We were living next door to my parents because they wanted so badly to help with my wife. And yet that made me feel like a child. So it couldn't really get too much worse than that. So I quit my government job where I was getting paid an awful lot of money. Started, oh wait, I'm sorry, I got the order a little bit backwards there. The startup came after I quit the government job, and that was after Ruby Fringe. But we moved out to the Eastern Shore because it was cheaper. We got a house that cost half as much. We live a few blocks from her mother, which is one of the reasons I bitch about my mother-in-law. I may say a lot of shit here, but I'm really just venting. I wouldn't be able to handle my wife's health without my mother-in-law. I would go completely fucking insane. But I'm doing what I love. At least I have that. That I got away from the bureaucracy. I got away from working in Java all the time. I was able to find something I cared about doing and made it my livelihood. And then I got to meet people like you guys, because I come to these events because I love these events. I made this event because I love these events. I got into freelancing after, and it turned out going to these events all the time and running this event are really good for business, as it turns out. Now I do better, or at least as well as I did when I was a government employee, and it's cheaper where we live, and I'm happier, so my wife is happier, and even though she's sick, and yes, she's got a shorter lifespan than I wish she would by far, things are about as good as they can be. So the reason I'm up here telling you all this now when I should be talking about other really bad code that I've seen is I'm hoping maybe someone out there is in a position a little bit like me where they're feeling a little down in their luck, life's been kicking them in the ass, and they've got a job that they hate, maybe there's some other shit wrong. Jump off the goddamn cliff. Maybe you fly. This is what Damien did for me, so I'm just trying to pay it back. Oddly, this is kind of a segue, sure more personal stuff, but hey, I'm already spilling my guts to you. I really was just going to put more code in this and have more anti-patterns, but I saw my wife one day. She's in a wheelchair now most of the time, that no longer. She can't really walk well, or talk well, or have really good conversations all that well. But I saw her holding one. She has caregivers, by the way, who look after her during the day so I can work, otherwise I wouldn't be able to. But I saw her holding my one of the caregivers' granddaughters. She's 4. And I swear to God, it was a kick in the stomach. I wanted to cry. And it was at that moment I knew I needed to give some outlet to this. And I just started writing this. And, well, there you have it. Hopefully it was worth something to you guys. Thanks for listening to me. And, well, I do kind of have one more slide, too, I guess, which, there we go. Keep flying and stay shiny. And, anyone have any questions? Yeah, I know, it's kind of a reaction I get for being anything else, but Tony. No, it's okay, but pretty much isn't anything too personal. Let me be very clear. I tell people about my wife's Huntington's disease because, you know, the quote that when I made that spot quote in Twitter, someone else had said kind of recently, reminded me recently of that other one, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. Unfortunately, my wife is among the few. You know, Huntington's disease is not very common. It's 1 in 30,000 people. There is no cure. They can't even slow it down. All they can do is make it a little easier on her. So the more I talk about it, the more people know about it, the more likely something doesn't get done. To that extent, that is actually a link to the Huntington's Disease Society of America, so if any of you feel like making a donation, please. Tony, sorry.
I'm going to say to ask this, right, but you had a slide on DCI.
Fair enough. I'm here to talk about code too.
Yeah. So you have a blog that's showing how you can do DCI with objects.
Oh, someone actually reads that. Yeah, okay, sure. Dan? What was your question?
The question is, why did you show the extend version that was the method path?
Rather than the decorator version? Well, okay, so sorry. Tony wanted to know why I should be extend version of DCI rather than a wrapper decorator version. I mean, you can argue that extend, and actually there's a typical argument that extend is essentially decorating the object. But it's mutating the object, though, permanently, until it gets garbage collected, of course. So, reason I did this one is I'm not entirely sold yet on decoration. I need to play with it a little bit more so that I'm comfortable that it will work in all circumstances the way I would like it to. I haven't played with DCI as much as I would like, but I do know that works, with exception of method cache. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Other questions? Code questions are okay too. Personal ones, fine, whatever. Don't be squeamish. Or, you know, have a nice nappy dinner. Anyone? Going once? Otherwise? Thank you. Oh wait, sorry, Chuck.
So I'm just curious, because it seemed like, you know, you went through all the stuff that bothers you, and then you kind of went through some of the personal stuff that you have to deal with. So when it all just piles on, I mean, when you feel like you're at the bottom of the heap, and there really is nothing you can do to climb out, where do you go from there?
I have to reflect. I go inside, I guess. I left out this time, I mentioned Ruby on Rails. I have a friend in San Francisco, Jim Meyer. He also organized LA Ruby. And Gogaruko, sorry Jim if you're watching this. I'm getting conferences mixed up. I've been to too many, I know too many organizers now, I guess. And he's a big proponent of the 7 habits of highly effective people. I know it's an old book, but it speaks to, well, why it is we do what we do. It's about principles. It's about who do you serve. It's about why do you do it. And when I was really at the bottom, I was reading that book, and while I was reading that book, seriously, it just hit me. We need to move, and we go move by my mother-in-law. So I get my space. My wife gets familial support. I get a little support. You get a cheaper home. Things might work. And hey, what do I have to lose, right? When you're at the bottom, you don't have much to lose. So that's the best time to take a risk. Anyone else? Thank you.